There is a book that does not exist yet, and it is the only book about this family that would permanently end every argument, close every debate, and rewrite every recap that has ever been published about the Brown family. Christine Brown wrote her truth. Kody Brown has gestured toward his version of events across years of confessionals and interviews. Multiple members of this family have taken their stories public in one form or another, but the one account that would sell more copies, generate more headlines, and land with more weight than anything this family has ever produced is truly Brown's. She is 13 years old. She is not writing it yet, but every single chapter already exists inside her memory. And today, we are going to outline the ones that Kody Brown would spend serious money to keep out of print. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome! Hit that like button right now, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the conversation we are building here is unlike anything else in the SisterWives space. Now let's get into it. Let's start with what Chapter 1 of that book would actually look like, because this is important, and it is something people tend to skip past when they analyze Truly's story. The first chapter would not be painful. The first chapter would be genuinely beautiful. It would describe the earliest years of her childhood, the particular warmth of Christine's household, the particular chaos of growing up at the center of a large plural family during the years when that family was, by most measures, still functioning. The noise of siblings, the rituals that families build when they are trying to hold something together, the specific texture of being the youngest, the most protected, the one who still believed that the world she was born into was simply how the world worked. That chapter would be the one Kody Brown would actually want people to read. Because it would be true. The early years had real warmth in them. Christine built something genuine in that household, and truly experienced it at its fullest, at the age when children absorb everything without filters or reservations. The joy in that chapter would be real. The safety would be real. The love would be real. And that is precisely why it would be the most structurally devastating chapter in the entire book. Because every reader who moved through that chapter, who felt the warmth of it, who understood what was being described, would spend every subsequent chapter measuring the distance between that beginning and what followed. The happiness of Chapter 1 is the foundation against which every loss in every chapter after it is felt. That is how memory works. That is how contrast works. And Truly Brown's memory, built on that foundation, would make everything that came after it hit harder than any adult narrator could manufacture. The chapter that comes after the warmth, and this is the one that Kody Brown cannot explain away with any interview he has ever given or will ever give, would have a title so quiet it would stop you cold. Something like, The Year Daddy Stopped Coming. Not a dramatic rupture, not a confrontation caught on camera, not an episode that viewers can go back and timestamp. Just the slow, undeniable arithmetic of a child tracking the frequency of her father's visits across seasons. The way a child does not announce to herself that something is changing, she simply adjusts. The first missed week becomes an exception. The second becomes a pattern. The third becomes the new expectation. And somewhere in that process, without anyone sitting her down and explaining it, Truly Brown stopped expecting what she had once taken completely for granted. That chapter would contain no villains in the traditional sense. It would not require Truly to name causes or assign blame. It would simply describe what it felt like to be a child doing math. And the math, laid out in a child's honest accounting, would be the most complete indictment of the years following the plural family's collapse that has ever been put into words. Because it happened in the space between episodes, in the unfilmed ordinary, in the quiet of an afternoon when she looked at the door and understood, without language for it yet, that the calculation had changed. No confessional that Kody Brown has ever given addresses that chapter, because no confessional was filmed in the unfilmed ordinary. The cameras captured the confrontations. The cameras captured the declarations. The cameras never captured a little girl quietly revising her expectations downward and calling it normal. Here is where the book gets into territory that would concern people far beyond the Brown family. There is a chapter in Truly's story, and if you have followed this family closely, you already feel it coming, that would be about the cameras themselves. Not cameras as background furniture, not the comfortable, accepted presence of a film crew that a child grows up treating as part of the wallpaper. This would be the chapter about the moment Truly, as a young person with growing self-awareness, looked back at the footage and understood what the cameras actually meant. What it meant that her worst years were being shaped into episodes. What it meant was that the confusion she felt during some of the most destabilizing weeks of her childhood was simultaneously being packaged and scheduled for broadcast. The question that chapter would raise, and it would raise it quietly, without accusation, with the particular devastating calm of someone who has had years to sit with something, is this. At what point does a child's private pain become content? At what point does the camera in the room stop being a documentary presence and start being something that a child deserved, at minimum, to have explained to her in terms she could understand and consent to? That chapter would not require Truly to be angry. The most powerful version of it would not be angry at all. It would simply be precise. And precision, in this context, would raise questions that no network executive would want to answer publicly, and no legal team would want to address in a deposition. That chapter exists in Truly's memory, whether or not it ever appears on a page, and the people who should be thinking about it already are. Now we get to the chapter that every person who has followed this story closely has been thinking about since the moment it happened, and has never been able to fully access, because no camera was ever positioned at the right height to capture it. The week Christine left. Every adult who was present for that week had a performance running. Christine had a narrative she was managing, a decision she had made and was executing with the particular focused calm of someone who had been planning for a long time. Kody had whatever he had. The confessionals give you his constructed version. And it is, like all his constructed versions, more about impression management than revelation. The older children had their own processing happening, their own complicated grief and relief running simultaneously. Truly was 9 years old. She had no performance running. She had no narrative to manage. She was simply there, at the height that 9-year-olds are, seeing everything that was happening around her with the particular clarity that children have when they have not yet learned how to look away from things that are uncomfortable. That chapter, written from her eye level, would see things that no adult camera ever captured. The specific texture of that week from inside the youngest perspective in the house, what the rooms felt like, where her father was in her account of it, what her mother's face looked like during the moments when Christine thought no one was watching, what the house sounded like in the evenings. That account would rewrite every recap, every analysis, every tearful confessional that Kody Brown ever produced about what happened during that period. Because Truly was there. She was at the height that children are. She was seeing everything the adults were performing around her, and she was absorbing it without the filters that adults use to make difficult things bearable. That chapter does not require drama. It does not require revelation. It simply requires her memory. And her memory of that week, unmediated and honest, would be the most read passage in the history of reality television publishing. But here is where this book does something that almost no one in the Sister Wives commentary space has fully articulated yet. And I want you to stay with me here, because this is the turn that changes everything. The chapter that would make Kody Brown put the book down and not pick it up again is not the chapter about his failures. It is not the chapter about visit frequency declining. It is not the chapter about the cameras, or the week Christine left, or any of the painful accumulation of losses that we have just walked through. The chapter that would be most devastating and most quietly hopeful is the chapter about David Woolley's ordinary Tuesdays. Not his extraordinary moments, not a grand gesture or a dramatic declaration, the ordinary Tuesdays, the unremarkable days, the specific texture of what it looks and feels like when a person simply shows up consistently, without drama, without negotiation, without the child needing to earn or anticipate or wonder. Truly Brown has now lived inside 2 different definitions of what fatherhood looks like on an ordinary day. She has the first definition built into her earliest memories, and her middle years. And she now has the second definition being built, day by day, in the home she currently lives in. She did not need anyone to explain the difference to her. The contrast explained itself in real time. That chapter would not be angry. It would not be a comparison structured to wound. It would simply describe what it felt like when the baseline changed, when what she had accepted as normal revealed itself, through contrast, to be something other than what fatherhood was required to be. When she understood, not through argument or analysis, but through lived, daily, undramatic experience, that consistency was possible. That someone chose to be present on a Tuesday, for no reason other than that it was Tuesday and she was there, was not exceptional. It was simply what it looked like when someone decided to show up. That chapter, written with the honesty of a child who experienced both realities, would do what no critical analysis of Kody Brown's parenting has ever fully managed to do. It would not argue. It would not prosecute. It would simply describe. And description, when it is precise and honest and built on lived experience rather than opinion, is the most complete verdict that exists. The reader would feel the difference between what was and what became possible. And that feeling, quiet, specific, undeniable, would be Kody Brown's most permanent and most complete accounting. We are only halfway through the chapters of this book. The second half goes to places that are, if anything, more consequential than what we have covered so far. We are going to talk about what happens when Truly, as a teenager, encounters her own childhood on a streaming platform. We are going to talk about the archive, what it means that the footage exists, that it is searchable, that it is recommended to strangers, that it cannot be taken back. We are going to talk about the final chapter of this book, which would not mention Kody Brown by name and would not need to. And we are going to talk about what this audience, the people who have followed this family longer and more carefully than any journalist has already known, about why Truly's account, when it eventually arrives in any form, will be the definitive one. Now, we go further, because the second half of Truly Brown's book is where the story stops being about what happened to her and starts being about what it means to carry it. And that distinction between experiencing something and living inside the archive of having experienced it is where this story becomes something that goes beyond one family, one show, one network, and one man's inability to reckon with what he chose and what he didn't. There is a specific kind of experience that no generation before Truly Brown's has ever had to navigate, and it is one that the adults in her life, including the ones who love her most, cannot fully prepare her for, because none of them have lived it either. At some point, and this moment has either already happened or is coming for her soon, Truly Brown will sit in front of a screen and encounter herself. Not a memory of herself, not a photograph, footage. Moving, speaking, breathing footage of herself as a child during the years that she now carries as private history, presented on a streaming platform as a catalog of episodes available to anyone with a subscription. The chapter about that moment would be titled something like Watching Myself. And it would be, of all the chapters in this book, the one that stays with readers the longest after they have finished it. Think about what that experience actually is. You are a teenager. You are in the process of building the identity that you will carry into adulthood, the particular, fragile, ongoing work of figuring out who you are on your own terms. And you encounter a thumbnail. Your face. Younger. In a moment you remember. And the caption beneath it is an episode title written by someone in a production office who never knew your name beyond the role it served in a season arc. You click on it, or you don't, but the footage exists either way. It is searchable. It is recommended by algorithms to strangers who will watch it and form opinions about you, and about your family, and about the worst weeks of your childhood without ever knowing that the child in the frame is now a teenager sitting somewhere, unable to unsee the fact that those weeks were broadcast. The specific devastation of that chapter is not the footage itself. It is the permanence of it. The archive does not age. The archive does not heal. The archive does not respect the distance that time creates between a person and their most difficult years. Every time Truly encounters that footage in a recommended video, in a fan forum discussion, in someone's throwback post on a platform she thought she was using for something unrelated, the wound is not historical. It is current. It is renewed. It is as fresh as the moment it first landed. That chapter would not be loud. It would not be furious, though fury would be completely justified. It would be quiet and specific in the way that only real experience can be. It would describe what it looks like from the inside of a person who did not choose to be documented, who was too young to understand what documentation meant, and who is now old enough to understand exactly what it means and cannot change a single frame of it. That chapter raises questions that apply far beyond the Brown family, about what we owe children who grow up on camera, about whether consent, at the age a child can give it, is actually consent, about what responsibility a network carries for the archive it has created out of someone else's childhood. These are not rhetorical questions. They are questions that a generation of reality television children are going to spend their adult lives answering in public. And Truly Brown's version of that reckoning, when it comes, will be among the most widely read. Now, I want to talk about something that this audience specifically understands, because the SisterWives fandom is not a casual viewership. It never has been. The people who have followed this family have done so with a level of attention and analytical precision that surpasses most journalism produced about the show. You have tracked inconsistencies across seasons. You have noticed what was edited out as clearly as you noticed what was left in. You have read the negative space, the things that were not said, the reactions that were filmed but never aired, the moments where a child's face told a story that the episode's narrative was actively trying to contradict. And this audience has known, for years, something that has never been stated directly in any official capacity. The most important account of this family that has not yet been produced is Truly's. Not Kody's explanation, not Robin's carefully constructed version of events built over years of practiced composure in front of a camera. Not even Christine's. And Christine's is generous and honest and real in ways that most public accounts by people in her situation never are. Truly's account, from inside the youngest perspective, from the person who had no PR strategy, no camera comfort built over years of practice, no diplomatic vocabulary developed to soften the edges of things that happened. Just a child who experienced all of it at ground level, and is now a teenager carrying the unedited version of events in her memory. The fandom's instinct about this is not sentimental. It is structural. Truly was in the most unique position of anyone in that family to observe what was actually happening, because she was the least able to filter it, the least equipped to perform composure, and the least likely to understand what she was supposed to. Children that young do not manage impressions. They receive experience directly. And what Truly received, directly, during the years this family was fracturing, is the most unmediated record of those events that exists anywhere. When that account eventually surfaces in any form, at any point in her life, it will be definitive in a way that nothing produced before it has been. This audience knows that. And this audience will be ready for it in a way that honors the weight of what she carries. That matters. How a story is received is part of how the person who tells it experiences the telling. And Truly Brown deserves to have her story received by people who have been paying attention carefully enough to hold it correctly. Let's talk about the final chapter, because the final chapter of Truly Brown's book is the one I have been thinking about longest. And it is the one I want to spend the most time with because it does something that the entire rest of the book builds toward without ever quite being able to deliver on its own. The final chapter would not be about Kody Brown. That is the first thing to understand about it. His name would not appear in it. The events of the previous years, the declining visits, the cameras, the week Christine left, the archive, none of it would be rehearsed or revisited or summarized in a final accounting. The final chapter would not close those loops with language. It would close them with images. Specifically, a morning. Ordinary, unremarkable to an outside observer, the kind of morning that does not make it into an episode because nothing happens in it that a production team would identify as content. Coffee smell and early light, and the sound of a stepfather's voice from the next room, saying something mundane, asking where something is, or commenting on the weather, or just existing audibly in a house where his existence is constant and assumed and never in question. Christine's laugh, the particular sound of it, which anyone who has watched this woman rebuild her life over the past several years knows is different now. Fuller, less carefully managed, more willing to be heard. The laugh of a person who is not performing happiness, but is simply experiencing it, and has forgotten in the best possible way to monitor how it sounds. And Truly, in the middle of that morning, doing something completely ordinary, eating breakfast, looking at her phone, half listening to the sounds of the house around her, and having the specific, quiet, unprecedented feeling of not waiting for anything, of not tracking something, of not doing the arithmetic of presence and absence that she spent years doing without knowing she was doing it. That feeling of the cessation of a vigilance that you carried so long you stopped recognizing it as vigilance is what the final chapter would describe. And it would describe it without explaining it. It would simply put the reader inside that morning and let the morning do what it could not do during the years that preceded it: hold without breaking. The final chapter would not mention Kody Brown by name. It would not need to. His absence from the final chapter is the most complete statement possible about the distance between what was and what is. Truly, Brown would not end her story with him. She would end it with the smell of coffee in a house where she does not count the days between visits. She would end it with her mother's full laugh. She would end it with the sound of a man who chose to be there in the next room on a Tuesday, for no reason other than that it is Tuesday, and this is his home, and these are his people, and he is not going anywhere. That final chapter would make readers cry, not because it is sad, because of how precisely it describes what was missing for so long, and what is now, finally, simply present. The particular grief of reading a happy ending when you fully understand the weight of what it replaced is the emotional experience of the final chapter of Truly Brown's book. And it would be, without question, the most lasting thing this family's story has ever produced. Here is what I want to leave you with before we get to the comments, because there is something important about the way we talk about Truly Brown in spaces like this one, and I think this audience is capable of doing it better than most. Truly Brown is not a symbol. She is not a narrative device. She is not the youngest and most sympathetic character in a story about adults behaving badly. She is a 13-year-old girl who is living her life, right now, today, in a home that her mother built with intention and love from the wreckage of something that should not have become wreckage. She is doing the ordinary, unremarkable, essential work of growing up. She is not defined by what happened to her. She is not waiting to become the person whose account we are anticipating. She is already becoming someone on her own terms, in her own time, in a house where the Tuesday arithmetic has changed. The reason her story matters, the reason we talk about it in spaces like this one, is not prurient. It is not about extracting drama from a child's difficult years. It is about the fact that her experience represents something that millions of children in all kinds of circumstances have lived and continue to live. The experience of watching a family reorganize itself around you, of having no agency over the terms of that reorganization, of adjusting your expectations downward so quietly that you stop noticing the adjustment. And then, if you are lucky, genuinely, structurally lucky in the way that luck requires both chance and a mother who fights for it, of arriving somewhere solid. That arc, the specific shape of that arc, is why Truly Brown's eventual account will matter beyond the SisterWives universe, beyond the fandom, beyond reality television as a genre. It will matter because it is honest in ways that are rare, and because honesty about what children experience inside families that are failing them, even families where the love was real, even families where the failure was not simple or clean, is one of the most useful things a public story can offer. This audience has been holding space for that story carefully. I see it in the comments. I see it in the way people in this community talk about Truly, with a protectiveness that goes beyond fan investment, a recognition that what she carries deserves to land somewhere that will receive it correctly. That instinct is right. Keep it. Now, the comments. I have a specific question for you, and it is a creative one. If Truly Brown's book exists one day, and I believe it will, in some form, at some point in her adult life, what is the title? Not the content, not the chapter breakdown, just the title. The 3 to 5 words that sit on the cover of the most important account this family will ever produce. I want you to drop it in the comments right now. Your best version of the title of that book. I am going to read every single one. I am going to pin the one that is most true, the one that captures what we have been talking about for this entire video in the fewest possible words. Because I think this audience collectively understands Truly Brown's story well enough to name it. And the right name matters. Drop your title below. If this video gave you something real to think about, if the framework we built here changed the way you see this family's story, or the way you think about what Truly's account will eventually mean, hit the like button. Not as a reflex, as an acknowledgement that this conversation deserved the time you gave it. That matters to this channel, and it matters to the reach of these ideas. Share this video with someone who follows this family seriously. Not for the algorithm, for the conversation. Because the people who are watching SisterWives content casually are not the audience that will receive Truly Brown's story the way it deserves to be received. The people in spaces like this one are. And the wider that group gets, the better the conditions are for a story like hers to land with the weight it carries. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because Topic 25 is coming, and it marks the beginning of the final stretch of this series. 6 topics remaining, and they go places this series has not yet entered, into territory that even the most devoted members of this audience will not see coming. The final 6 are structured differently from everything that has come before them. The analysis gets sharper, the stakes get higher, and the conclusions when they arrive will be ones that this audience has been building toward for longer than they may realize. Do not miss what is coming next. The conversation we are having in this space is not finished. It is, in fact, just arriving at the part where it starts to matter most. Truly Brown is 13 years old. She is not writing her book yet, but she is living the final chapter right now in an ordinary house on an ordinary Tuesday in a life that holds without breaking. When she is ready to tell it, this audience will be ready to receive it. Until then, we hold space, we pay attention, and we keep the conversation honest.